Well, welcome everyone. My name is Sister Colleen Gibson. I'm a Sister St. Joseph of Philadelphia. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to tonight's conversation about women deacons. Tonight's conversation in particular is about catechists and the future of women deacons. So we are so happy that you're here with us and that we're able to share this space and engage in this really meaningful conversation. For some of you, it may be your first time with us. For others, you may be with us each month. But at the beginning, we just want to go over a couple of ground rules, some business before we begin. And tonight's conversation really will be broken up into two pieces. So we'll begin, Dr. Zagano will give us some input on the topic at hand, catechists and the future of women deacons. And then we'll move into a question and answer session. Now, we have a number of people on this call, so I'll act as the voice of the people. And so a number of people have submitted questions in advance via email. So I have that list put together. But sometimes the Spirit moves us as we listen. And so I'd invite you, if a question begins to arise in you, to submit it to me in the chat. So if you're new to Zoom, which maybe some of us are after these many months of the pandemic, along the bottom of Zoom, there is a button that says chat. You can click on that. And I'd invite you to send those questions directly to me, so to Colleen Gibson in the chat. And I'll be able to add those in and just allow our conversation to flow as we make our way through the evening. These conversations are recorded and they can be found later on. They'll be posted in a few days on Dr. Zagano's website. We'll post a link to that in the chat. We'll also post a number of links throughout the evening in the chat so that you'll be able to access different things that we talk about and just different things that might be helpful. I'll also put in the chat, once we begin, a link to sign up for Phyllis's column so you could hear her insights on any number of topics, which is a wonderful thing. And so I think that is all of the upfront information for today. And so just by way of introduction, a woman who needs no introduction, Phyllis Zagano, but I will give you a little bit of an introduction just so we can enter into our time together. Dr. Phyllis Zagano is Senior Research Associate in Residence and Adjunct Professor of Religion at Hofstra University. She's the author or editor of over 23 books in religious studies, including her newest offering, Women Icons of Christ from Paulist Press. Dr. Zagano has also written the books Women Deacons, Past, Present, Future, Women in Ministry, Emerging Questions on the Diaconate, and Women Deacons, Essays with Answers. Her award-winning Just Catholic column runs monthly in the National Catholic Reporter, and her work has won numerous awards and been translated around the world. In August of 2016, Pope Francis appointed her to the Papal Commission for the Study of Women in the Diaconate, which completed its report to the Pope at the end of 2018. She's an expert in this field and we always have interesting conversations. And so it's my great pleasure to be able to engage her and to engage all of you in conversation. So I'll hand it over to Phyllis to talk a little bit about catechists.
Well, thank you, Colleen. You know, it's a wonderful opportunity to meet this community of believers, actually, to talk about questions about women in the church. I mean, that's the basic. And we thought that it'd be a good idea to fill folks in on the new Motu proprio that Pope Francis passed really just about a week or so ago, called Ancient Ministry, Antiquum Ministerium, instituting the ministry of catechists. And as could be predicted, people were either really happy or really unhappy, or said it didn't make any difference. I was happy, and I'll tell you why. Because in the run up to the diaconate, the Second Vatican Council wrote that where Episcopal conferences deem it appropriate, the order of the diaconate should be restored as a permanent state of life, according to the norms of the Constitution de Ecclesia, for there are men who actually carry out the functions of the deacon's office, either preaching the word of God as catechists or providing presiding over scattered Christian communities in the name of the pastor and the bishop, or practicing charity in social or relief work. It is only right to strengthen them by the imposition of hands, which has come down from the apostles, and to bind them more closely to the altar, that they may carry out their ministry more effectively because of the sacramental grace of the diaconate. Now, the naysayers say, well, we've always had catechists. What's the big deal? Well, the big deal is twofold. One is that there are catechists and then there are catechists. Unfortunately, in many places in the world, Aunt Sally just retired, so maybe she can teach second grade catechism. Not that Aunt Sally has any specific training, or even that Aunt Sally might be a teacher. In other places in the world, catechists have formal ceremonies to be inaugurated into this ministry. So the people who say it doesn't make any difference point to the ceremonies that are blessing ceremonies that are in various dioceses, various countries, to somehow ratify the ministry of catechists. But here, Pope Francis has notched it up a little bit. And if you remember, on the Feast of the Baptism of the Lord, Pope Francis changed Canon 230, paragraph 1, which is about the installation of lectors and acolytes. And why is that a big deal? Well, he changed it to say any lay person can be installed as a lector or acolyte. So if you put these all together, I see a trajectory towards the diaconate, or at least I hope it's not wishful thinking, and I'll tell you in a bit why. The ministry of lector and acolyte was part of the cursus honorum, which was gotten really from the Roman elite, the steps in which you got to be governor or senator. And they were lector, porter, exorcist, acolyte, subdeacon, deacon, priest. By the 1917 code, it was illegal to ordain anybody a deacon unless he and only he was on his way to priesthood. But all of those steps had to be gone through. You had to be blessed as a lector and as a porter and as an exorcist and as a acolyte and then ordained to the major order of subdeacon. Well, in 1972, Pope Paul VI just quashed all that with a document called Ministerium Quaedam. And he said, look, I am replacing all of these with the installed ministries of lector and acolyte. And so now we get to the 21st century, and we find that Pope Francis has said, well, these are lay ministries, and if they're lay ministries, they should be open to women. However, these lay ministries, when people are installed in them, they're only installed in them if they're going to be ordained as deacons or as priests. The inclusion now of the installed ministry of catechists kind of widens the whole picture of the parish, if you will, and kind of formalizes, or actually does formalize, this ministry of teaching, of evangelization. So he's telling people, as I wrote in my column in NCR, to pick up their baptismal promises and run with them. And he's talking about having specific rituals, installation rituals for now lector for women, not a separate, use the same ritual, lector for acolyte, and now for catechists, same ritual for both males and females. And as I said at the top, it's important that that he is installing men and women as catechists for two reasons, basically. One, as I read earlier, the catechist was to be strengthened, was to be ordained a deacon if so necessary or required, and had the vocation. So his ministry could be strengthened with the charism of order, and that is still there. And all along, really in the modern times, the past 50 years, women in the diaconate, the ordained diaconate, has been considered. So that's the good news. Now, will this affect the vocation of women to the diaconate and their actual ordination at some point in the future? If you happen to read a news story by Cindy Wooden of Catholic News Service, if you haven't seen it, it'll be in your diocesan papers this week, where there is going to be a change to canon law. And the change in canon law that got the headline was that sex crimes against children will be moved out of the canons that say, well, these are sins against chastity, and moved into the category of serious delicts or serious crimes. At the end of the story, it says another delict would be the attempted ordination of a woman. And I've been back and forth with Cindy a couple of times and finally found in 2010, there was a document from the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith about substantive norms. And substantive norms number 5 were just those words, the attempted ordination of a woman, the attempted sacred ordination of a woman. And at the time, I asked if it applied to the diaconate. No one gave me a straight answer. There is no current law against ordaining a woman as a deacon. There have been various, obviously in councils, you know about the councils in the history of the church where one or another said we don't, or synod, local synod, we don't want to ordain women as deacons. Well, they said that because women were being ordained as deacons. We have women ordained as deacons in Northern Italy up until the 12th century, and certainly longer in the Eastern churches, really up to the modern times in the Eastern churches. And we do have the liturgies and we do have the histories. So I think what it all turns on is what is the meaning of sacred ordination. And in the history of Canon 1024, which says only a baptized male is validly ordained, that really has to do with so-called sacred ordination, which is, I think, and I hope, ordination to the priesthood. Otherwise, it's game over. And I can't imagine that the Holy Father would let that slip past him. So I've asked Cindy Wooden, and I just haven't had time because it only popped in the past 24 hours or so, to find out the exact wording that will be coming down. If it is the exact wording from the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith, that it could go in either way. Sacred ordination could be defined as priestly ordination, or it could, well, that's what would be the hope, because that's really the only documentation that they have in terms of legal, historical, or doctrinal support relative to the ordination of women. So I don't know how long I've been talking. I didn't take my watch off, but if you have questions, Colleen, I can probably take them now. Okay.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Phyllis. It's very, very interesting. And we'll keep our eyes on our local papers to see that article from Wooten about, what is this really going to mean? A question that came in while you were speaking was about the installation and what you mean by the installation of a catechist. And so, would that be a ritual? What might that look like?
Well, I didn't write it, but the Holy Father says somebody is doing it. At the interestingly, Antiqua Ministerium, instituting the ministry of catechists, is a much longer document than his Motu proprio on his own accord, changing the Canon 230, paragraph 1 of the Code of Canon Law to allow women as well as men be installed as lectors or acolytes. What the Holy Father wrote is that he says in bold letters, I established the lay ministry of catechists. The Congregation for the Doctrine of the Worship and the Discipline of the Sacraments will soon publish the rite of institution of the lay ministry of catechist. And I invite the Episcopal conferences to render effective the ministry of catechist, determining the necessary proofs of formation, normative criteria, admission to this ministry, so on and so on. But he has it, I don't know if you can see it, in pretty bold letters here. I am creating the ministry of, I established the lay ministry of catechist. I've only read the English, so I can't, right now, I can't really parse it out too carefully for you. What it would look like, it's funny, I've never been to an installation ceremony. When I was in seminary first year, that everybody wrote to the bishop to ask to be installed as lectors. And of course, I wrote my letter and got a lovely letter back saying, "Too bad you're a girl." But I don't know what the ceremony is. I do know what the ceremonies for the ordinations to minor orders of lector, porter, exorcist, and acolyte. And it's a simple blessing. And that's the whole argument historically between keratonia and keratonethia. One is the blessing, the other is the ordination. Both of them actually mean laying on of hands, but the minor orders were ordained, if you will, in the sacristy, whereas the major orders of subdeacon, deacon, and priest happened in the sanctuary and during a mass, whereas things developed. I mean, first couple of 100 years, we really didn't have ordinations at all. So the bishop said, "Hey, and you want to be a lector," and that's kind of where it went.
That's very interesting. I think to see what blessings would develop and to know that the church grows and develops over time is very interesting.
Well, let me interrupt you here, because at the end of the document on installing lectors and acolytes, the Holy Father specifically mentions the development of doctrine, that this is a development of doctrine, that basically, it seems crazy to say this in the modern world, basically men and women are equally lay people.
Is a novel idea, but I think, I think it's valuable to see you show even the font that it's printed in. It's bold. It is, if you're giving a speech, this is clear. We want to get this across. So sometimes the simplest things are the things that, need to be underscored. So I think that's really helpful. There was a number of questions came in around this motu proprio and around catechists. One questioner wrote, and she said, I don't know whether to be pleased with Pope Francis's new ministry of catechists or to be a bit concerned about decreasing efforts for the sacramental validation of women as deacons. So what does this movement, what does the motu proprio do for women other than acknowledge what they're already doing?
Well, that's a big thing, to acknowledge what women are already doing, I think, and to formalize it and to ritualize it. The way the motu proprio is written and the way anything happens, the norms will be created by the local conferences of bishops, and then it's up to individual bishops to either have installed catechists or not, just as it's up to installed lectors or acolytes. I think I said when we talked about installing lectors and acolytes, I wrote to a bunch of bishops, some I knew, some I didn't, and there were basically a couple of different responses. One was, "Gee, it's great." The other was, "We'll wait and see what happens." And then the third was to ignore me, which is, you have to recognize there are a lot of bishops still in the Catholic Church who just ignore women, period. End of fact.
Yeah, and I think we've discussed before about even women deacons, if that were to come to pass, that it would be up to the local ordinary to carry that out. And one of the questions that came in is, what does this papal document change at the diocesan or the parish level, and what are the bishops required to follow to ensure that they're in compliance with the Pope's announcement? So would this also be up to a local bishop?
Yeah, it is. It's almost kind of particularly about lector and acolyte, it's almost a reversal or making it too unnecessary or just too tacky for some bishops to do what they've been doing. I won't name the diocese, but there's a diocese in the United States that will only allow installed lectors and acolytes to be lectors and acolytes, because the canon 230 paragraph 2 already says that any lay person can perform the ministry of lector and acolyte if the bishop in the parish needs it. So this particular bishop thinks that he doesn't want women on the other side of the altar rail fence. So he only if you are a male person can you be installed, not necessarily on the path to the diaconate or the diaconate and priesthood. And he has effectively kept women from being extraordinary ministers of the Eucharist, which is a function of the acolyte, and from being lectors, because he doesn't think women should speak in church, you know. So I think that the collision you're finding here is between the law as it has codified itself and gelled and congealed and gotten itself written in stone, and the development of doctrine that's happening outside the walls, the 108 acres of the Vatican, that the church is moving forward, and the church sees that this is necessary. The comment made during the Second Vatican Council about catechists, specifically catechists, these were men, mostly married men in Africa, who were real catechists. Many of them were running parishes, and that their ministry should be strengthened by the charism of order. So I think he's both breaking apart and putting back together some concepts from the early church. And these are three different ministries, obviously: lector, acolyte, and catechist. But it's a you know, it can go in any direction. I think if you add this, the comments the Holy Father made with Great Amazonia, which is the response to the final document of the 2019 Amazon Synod, he skipped over the request to ordain some married deacons there as priests, and he also kind of punted on women deacons. He did eventually, very quickly, accepted their recommendation for installed women lectors and acolytes. But he also said, and he emphasized Canon 517, paragraph 2, parish life coordinators, because 2/3 of the parishes in the Amazon are run by women, mostly women religious. So let's professionalize them. Let's pay them. You know, let's give them terms of office. And if they have vocation to the diaconate, fine. If they don't, fine. If they have vocation to be catechists, or if they are catechists, fine. If they're not, fine. There are so many flowers on the side of the road. I think that what he's trying to say is that the priesthood specifically is for sacramental ministry. And he did say in 2015 in Philadelphia to the assembled bishops that the job of the bishop is to pray and to preach, and that the apostles recognized they couldn't do everything, so the apostles invented the diaconate. And then he had a little aside, and he looked at Cardinal Mueller and said, "Did I get that right, Cardinal Mueller?" Which I found very interesting. But so I think he's trying to say that the parish itself needs to be to expand its understanding of who's doing what and who's working, and different places it will evolve in different ways. I think his thinking would be in not ordaining married men as deacons, particularly in the Amazonia. I mean, you have a woman who's been running the parish for 10 years, and Jack, the deacon, gets ordained. I think the current church thinks, well, if he's a priest, he's in charge. And I think that's what he's trying to get away from. So
I think that's a good point, Phyllis. And you make the point, and actually somebody wrote in about your latest column in NCR about how Francis is kind of redesigning the church and making sure that, you know, people can play, that anyone who's called to ministry can minister in many different ways, that it isn't just all concentrated in the priesthood, that, we are all called in different ways to serve. The question that came in regards to your article, the questioner says, in your latest column, you talk about how Francis is redesigning the church, and you say that in response to the Amazon Synod, the Pope has quote, set a laser focus on function rather than functionality. And so the questioner says, what exactly does this mean? And is there a way to shift this focus, or better yet, apply such a focus to sacramental ministry?
Well, I think that's what he's doing. Potestas, or the power of orders, has gotten to be, the priest is ordained and now he can do everything. And I don't think that's very healthy for anybody, for the priest or for people. What he's looking at now is excuse me, actually, I question that term myself, but the editors let it pass, function and functionality. What I was thinking was, it's not what the individual has the power to do, which would be, to me, functionality, but rather what the person is doing, and what is needed. So, I had a conversation with a professor this morning about this point. I think he's really trying to say, well, the priest is the sacramental minister, and it's a very important part of the community. And the priest is the confessor. And the priest is, in many cases, the leader. But the priest need not be the manager of the school play, or the manager of or the one who trains the altar servers, or, and there are many other jobs that people can have. The job, what's interesting about the installation of a catechist is that this is not necessarily altar service, whereas lector and acolyte imply altar service. Catechist not necessarily implies altar service. I could see one direction his going would be to allow catechists, to give catechists more the opportunity to preach. Because right now, no one can preach except a cleric, deacon, priest, or bishop who is actually involved in the celebration of the liturgy. Only that man can preach, which, people should know that the visiting missionary who pops out of the sacristy for 5 masses preaching, it's illegal. And aside from being tacky, it's totally illegal. It's part. It needs to be part of the celebration. However, the work around here, I think it's 1994. There's a document out of the Congregation for Education and a couple of others, that people who are more able to speak to children may preach at masses for children, and these would be the catechists, and the catechists are women. And I don't know if it's been your experience, but some of my friends who are college chaplains say, well, they're children. So in colleges, sometimes the women chaplains do preach.
That's very interesting. We had a question, and I think you hit on it, but I'd like to see if you have anything else to say around it, Phyllis, around this idea of kind of looking at, that they have the lector and the acolyte now, the motu proprio on catechists. But the questioner says, does the institution of these positions or roles, such as catechists, avoid the issue of women serving at the altar, preaching from the ambo, playing a role in the liturgy that could alter the way women are seen as a part of the church? I guess it's that piece about, what would a catechist be allowed to do, is because it seems like it's this giving of roles to women, but outside of the space of that altar or liturgical space.
Well, no, they're both there. And as I just said, the catechist is often the one best qualified to preach. And there's a lot of preaching to be done outside of the liturgy. So right now, under the current law, and that would be a liturgical law, not canon law, a cleric involved in a mass is the only one who can preach the homily, except at masses for children where the catechist may be more able. So maybe that would become more prevalent. In terms of at the altar and letting women across the altar rail fence, lector and acolyte. When they first allowed women to be lectors, you had to read from a separate lectern outside the altar rail. That was liturgical law. It is still liturgical law, and I've said this before, Music and Sacrament, 1967, a mixed choir, male and female, will not sing inside the sanctuary. Basta così. And I think that as I said, the business of the installation of the installed catechist, this ministry of catechists, it could go in either direction. It could be an argument for allowing lay preaching for installed catechists. It also could be a way to forestall a decision on women in the diaconate, or it could be a way to assist that. If you have women installed as catechists, well, then I would revert to the Second Vatican Council, which says, well, some of them should be have their ministry strengthened by the charism of order. I think what he's trying to say, that there, and I think I wrote this in the column, there are a lot of different colors of flowers on the side of the road, and I think he's trying to see more people involved in more serious ways in the ministries of the church. But it all depends on the pastor. It all depends on the bishop right now. So.
Yeah, I think I have one more on catechists, and then to kind of we'll shift into the future of women deacons. But a question came in about the impact of the motu proprio locally and also globally. And a question to you, as you see it, where do you see it having greater impact? Will it have an impact on the global church? Will catechists have any authority, or will it have more of an impact on the way in which women are seen on the parish level or within a parish, because they'll be installed in a specific ministry in that way?
Well, I think it could. Again, it depends on who's running the show. In terms of globally, when I first read this, you know what, Colleen, I thought about dinner I had with the bishops of Cambodia and Thailand in Rome when I was living in the Holy Father's house. And I said, what do you think? Of course, I said, what do you think about women deacons? And they said, you know what, we would love male deacons, female, we don't care. We need help. We don't have enough of an educated population to ordain. Individual bishops said, I could not ordain male or female deacon. I don't have people highly enough educated. It's not to say that the catechist is some kind of a lower level than the diaconate. It's more to, and that has been a criticism right away, that part of what he's doing with installed lector, installed acolyte, and now the installed catechist is he's almost recreating a cursus honorum. You could see you're a lector, then you're an acolyte, then you're a catechist, then you're a deacon. But I see it more around the wheel, that he's saying that people have permanent ministries in these areas. And some people are much better teachers than others. You know that as well as I do. Some people have are able to serve more gracefully at the altar. The function of the acolyte is also to minister the Eucharist to the sick, and in hospitals and nursing homes. And some people can do it and some people can't. Ministry of lector, some people know how to pronounce things and some people don't. And I think that it's, I think his vision is to try and break things open. I don't know if we are able to receive his vision right now. And Rick Gallardes had an article today or yesterday in the National Catholic Reporter, and I don't think he was that sanguine about the ministry of catechists. So there are a lot of different discussions going on. I think it's exciting that there are discussions going on.
Yeah, I think to see where the spirit can bear fruit and how it can develop. I mean, even just I give talks, and the other day I was doing a theology on tap, and I got my first question about the catechist and why people should serve as catechists. I never get that. That's not a question that usually is in the repertoire, but I think it gets people talking about these types of things in the same way that we're having these conversations about women deacons. It plants a seed so that the conversation can begin. And we can move it further down the road, and the spirit can work within that. A question that came in about women deacons and the future of women deacons, kind of looking at the past and the future, was around the commissions. And so the questioner says, when the church makes decisions, it consults scripture, tradition, history, and experience. And we've talked about this, in the past, what the first commission seems to have looked at, and what this one, could probably look at. But the questioner says, the popes had 2 commissions, but neither has invited women who experience the vocation or the call to be ordained deacons to be on the commission. How can we possibly know the will of God if the voices of these women are not heard or are not included in having a voice to be able to voice their experience and give voice to that? So do you see that as, are there forums that are being put forth in which women's voices who feel called to sacramental ministry as deacons, where those conversations are happening and where that may be able to get to the commissions eventually?
Well, 2 things. First, the underlying supposition is incorrect, I would say. How does this individual know the vocations of the members of the commission? There were 6 men and 6 women on my commission, and 5 men and 5 women on the next commission. The first commission, it has been publicly said by the president of the International Union of Superiors General, provided a study about history to the Holy Father. I have said that I've never seen the papers that the Holy Father received. They were prepared and forwarded by the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. The Holy Father did tell the sisters that he had more papers. If they want them, they could ask for them. As far as I know, they have not asked for them. The second commission, anyway, my commission was quite competent, had some pretty high-powered people, competent to talk about the theology, the anthropology, and the history of the question. The second commission, to my mind, is qualified to talk about the pastoral role and perhaps need for women in the diaconate. I haven't studied the materials that have been gathered for me that carefully. The commission will meet, as far as I know, in the fall. They have not met. They were named in April 8th of 2020, and they will not meet until around the middle of September, I'm told. But to my mind, in fact, there are actually a couple of catechists, women catechists, on the second commission, now that I think of it. But there's no one who's done original research into the history. There's no one who I would call a first-class theologian. It's more a group of individuals to talk about the needs. I think that the question they could answer, let me put it this way: what does a deacon do, and what about these tasks and duties can a woman not do? I think that's it. So in terms of various fora, there are, and we'll talk about it in a little bit, there are various movements in the church where people are getting together to talk about the vocation to the diaconate. So.
That's very interesting. And I think, to see how it develops and where it goes, and see where this fall takes us. A number of questions came in, Phyllis, and we've talked about clericalism and clerical culture before, but a number of questions came in along those lines. So the first, is a simple question, but when we think about women deacons, the questioner says, doesn't this just build on clerical culture? So maybe could you speak a little bit about, does the proposition of women deacons and having women deacons, would that risk a continuation of clericalism as we know it now? Would it expand our idea of clerical culture? Can you talk about the relationship between this as a clerical role, a clerical vocation, and how that might be tied to clericalism?
Well, being a cleric doesn't necessarily make you clerical. And I think we need to understand the negative meaning of that term. You know, when you're talking about the narcissist, self-involved, I'm in charge cleric, and I know and you don't, that's clericalism. But if we should not be ordaining women as deacons, well, then we shouldn't ordain anybody as deacon. So if you want to get rid of the diaconate, that's a whole different story. And if you want to get rid of clericalism, then you need to do what I think the Holy Father's doing, which is to try to break up the tasks and duties of the church and return to the early notion where we are all around the table, and we all have different, different functions, different skills, different talents to bring to the table to celebrate in Thanksgiving at the Eucharist.
That's very, very true. A question kind of around the history is, the diaconate, the deacons are clerics. So the first part of the question was, was the diaconate in ancient times a clerical rank or not? Yes. But the question that then comes is, when did the diaconate simply become viewed as a step then to priestly ordination, and the idea that the diaconate or diaconal call was a vocation unto itself? When did that change happen?
Yeah, I think everything happened in the 10th, 11th, 12th centuries, and part of it was that the deacons were very powerful, and the priests didn't like that. The deacons controlled the money. We have 37 popes who were elected as pope while they were deacons. Pope Gregory VII is the one who ended that. He demanded to be ordained as actually he was ordained as, I don't have the year in my head, but he was ordained as a priest on Pentecost Sunday, and then was consecrated Bishop of Rome on June 29th, the feast of Peter and Paul, or St. Peter. No, what's June 29th? The feast of the founding of the church. But it's a big feast. That's gone out of my head. But in any event, he ended that, and so when you find Grecian codifying laws in the 12th century, 11th, 12th century, and basically it got to the point where, as I said earlier, in the 1917 Code of Canon Law, the only people to be ordained as deacons were those who were expected to advance to the priesthood. It happened gradually. We can't say that everything happened lockstep all over the world. We don't know. We know what we know. I think we have to recognize that in history, there's a lot of history of women that has been, shall we say, lost, partly because it was destroyed. I'm having a devil of a time finding liturgies for women deacons in certain parts of the world, and we know these women were ordained sacramentally. So, I don't think there's anything totally nefarious about it. I think it's more women aren't important. But in terms of it was by the 12th century, the diaconate became almost ceremonial. You'd have 7 ceremonial deacons in each cathedral parish. You'd have an archdeacon for a while then, and they still do actually in the Anglican churches. But it just kind of faded away. And it's almost going in the opposite direction now, because the end of the diaconate, the deacon, particularly the woman deacon, was ministering to, and that's, I got my book in my lap, this book here, I love this book. I mean, I wrote it, but I looked into all the ministries that women had, and the women deacons were going out into the villages, were ministering to the sick. Women deacon abbesses were hearing confessions. They were leading prayer. Just so many tasks and duties. And as those tasks and duties were kind of forced into the monastery, coincidentally, outside the monastery, the tasks and duties of the deacon were being taken away, and the deacon became purely ceremonial. And in many parishes now around the world, we find that the deacon is purely ceremonial. You know, what does the deacon do? And in some places, I've said this before, an archbishop years ago said to me, "They're Sunday dress-up guys." You know, they really don't have a place, have a ministry. It's all in process. What the church needs, the church will not be denied. I am convinced of that. And I think that it's a slow process. I gave a talk yesterday and people were saying, "Oh, why is it taking so long?" I said, "Well, you know, it takes, a bishop I know says that Rome is the eternal city, and they set their clocks accordingly." And, you know, so.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, that's great. You kind of play right into a question that we got. Sometimes I get emails from people and when we get a whole story. But this one I found particularly poignant. And the member of our community here talked about COVID and the effects of COVID. And she said, you know, I've felt freed during COVID from the rituals and routines that I've lived under my whole life as a cradle Catholic. You know, in some ways she talked about, you know, the grieving of not being able to go to mass in person, but it changed her whole way of looking at things. And that she gained faith and also a freedom from the confines of her parish and the things that she always knew. And so she wanted to know, what do you think the effects of the COVID pandemic will be on the church? And do you think that the shift in rituals and routines can give the church a fresh perspective on women deacons?
I think, yes. I think that there's a recognition of the need for community. I think people who were able to attend or to watch celebrations of, you know, soul celebrations of fellows in, you know, in empty churches doing what they could, recognize that, you know, we're kind of all in this together, and that it's really about the communal meal, if you will, of Eucharist. I've seen some dioceses or parishes saying, well, you know, you've got to come back to mass now. You know, you can't just watch it on TV, and it's very important. And but I think that approach, of course, is not right. And I think people recognize that they need to go to their own communities to be with the people of their community and to pray with them. And I think that the value of community will be enhanced as we come out of COVID. On the flip side of it, however, is there are a lot of people who said, you know, I find my God going on walks in the woods on Sunday mornings and playing with my children, playing with my grandchildren, playing tennis, you know. And so the cradle Catholics who had the Baltimore Catechism beaten into them, literally, I think are saying, you know, well, we've kind of outgrown that. And so to be called back to a more vibrant church where people are able to see each other almost as equals. You know, I'm thinking right now, in Ireland, years ago, I went to a hurling match and there was one particularly vicious player in the match. And my friend who I was standing next to said, "Oh, that's Father so-and-so." I was like, that to me was terrific. I mean, not the fact that he was beating people over the head, but that he was like one of the guys. And I think that's the most important thing, that we can move away from this princely separatist nation of clerics here and princes here, and to be specialists, you know, doctors, lawyers, Indian chiefs. We all have our specialty, and our specialty is to be respected. And so if your specialty and your competency is to be a catechist or to be a deacon or to be a priest or to be a bishop or to be an acolyte or to be a lector. Of course, the flip side of that is, well, then you've got everybody crowded around the altar and nobody in the pews. So some of us have to be just regular Joe sitting there helping with the celebration as participants. But you don't know. It depends on the culture. It depends on how it grows.
Yeah, and I think that leads us into one of the people who wrote in, talked about the question we should be asking. He said, so often we can rely on tradition or history, and we can talk about that until we're blue in the face or the cows come home. And it's important to look back on those things to see where we've been. But the questioner said, the question that I find myself asking is, what does the church need now? So for you right now, Phyllis, what do you see as, what does the church need now?
I think the church needs now to look at at Pentecost and to recognize that it's our responsibility to discern in our nation, in our town, in our parish, in our diocese, what the church needs. I can't tell the bishop in Arizona that he needs to have women deacons. I can tell him he can ordain women as deacons, but I can't tell him he needs them. I can tell you that bishops from Africa sat with me at dinner and said, yeah, we need women deacons. And I've heard this, over the years. 20 years ago on a subway in Washington, D.C., a Franciscan bishop from South America said he wanted women deacons, number one, and number two, he could think of about 5 women religious who were already running parishes in his area. But we're kind of running out of time, and I think that what the church needs now is to look forward to the Spirit and to discern. Discernment is the big word. So,
yeah, and I think that is a good place to kind of bring our conversation to a close. That piece about discernment, I think that's when we talk about synodality. That is a piece of what the Pope is doing, but it's in our own hearts, it's in our own communities. It's forming a culture of discernment and the invitation to that. So we're getting close to the hour, and so I just wanted to go through a couple of items of business as we come to a close. And so I want to thank you again for being with us here this evening. And as we come to a close and look towards the next month, I have some news to share with this community. So many of you have joined Phyllis and me in conversation monthly over the last 2 years. And during that time, we've really built a community. You can see it in the chat. I can see it in my inbox through the number of emails that I answer. And it's been a pleasure to engage in that way. As we look towards the future, there's a few transitions that are in store. I'm happy to announce that beginning in the fall, I'm going to be pursuing graduate studies at Boston College School of Theology and Ministry. And so as I make that transition, I'm going to be stepping down from my hosting duties here in these conversations. I'll be one of the people. I won't be the voice anymore, but I'll be in the background. And so we're going to be welcoming some new voices into the dialogue because we're always talking about how we need to expand the dialogue and the conversation. And so the newly launched project Discerning Deacons will be hosting a new series of conversations about women deacons, which I hope that you'll continue to take part in. Now, Luke Hansen is one of the co-directors of Discerning Deacons, and you've probably seen him in our chats over these months. He'll be hosting next month's webinar. But before I hand it over to Luke to talk about Discerning Deacons and give us a little bit of background and to talk about June's webinar, I just wanted to express my gratitude for the gift of this community and to just say that I look forward to the ways in which this dialogue around women in the diaconate will continue into the future. I also, of course, owe a deep debt of gratitude to Phyllis, who has shared her witness with me and her wisdom in so many ways over this time. and who's inspired me through her dedicated scholarship, through her personal integrity, and who I've been blessed to have the opportunity to be in conversation with over these many, many months and over the course of this series. So as we've discussed many times, the Holy Spirit is at work in our world and in our conversations and in the life of the church. And so I pray, like we were just talking about discernment, that we will be attentive to the graces that are being offered to us, and that women will be able to fully contribute their gifts in diaconal ministry for the vitality of our church and our world. So I thank you for engaging that spirit. And now I'm going to invite Luke Hansen to come on and to speak a little bit about the June webinar and about discerning deacons. So you there, Luke?
I'm here.
Okay.
Thank you,
Take
Sister
it away.
Colleen. I'm going to throw a few slides up on the screen. It's been such a joy to be a part of all of these webinars and to see a community that's been formed. I'm pretty confident that this is the most educated group of Catholics in the world on this topic of women in the diaconate. So yeah, it's been really exciting to be a part of this. We recently launched a team of us, a new project called Discerning Deacons, and this is our mission, to engage Catholics in the active discernment of our church about women in the diaconate. Just knowing how frequently this topic has been coming up at synods of bishops, and we've had papal commissions, and we want to make sure that, yeah, every Catholic is aware of it and has a chance to participate in it. So part of our project, well, we have a website, so I hope you'll visit it. The link is in the chat. You can sign up for our weekly newsletter. There's a place to share your hope, your prayers regarding the church's discernment, and we're inviting people to host conversations. And I know people in this community are so well informed on this topic. I think you're all primed to spread the word and to invite other people into conversation about what it would mean for our church if women were ordained as deacons. So part of our work now is going to involve this monthly webinar series that we're really excited about. And we're going to have guest speakers each month. We're going to cover a range of topics like the diaconate circles and how that helped restore and renew the permanent diaconate at Vatican II. We're going to invite women from the Amazon to share the story of the diaconal ministry that they're doing. We're going to explore topics like domestic violence and also the role of women who are serving as chaplains today. And I'm excited to announce the first event in our series will be next month, and our guest will be Dr. Phyllis Zagano. And as Sister Colleen said, I'm going to be hosting this event, and we're going to talk about sustaining our faith and hope. And so much of the listening we've done, we've heard people question, do I really have hope, that the church can change and that something like this could happen. So, we face so many challenges to our faith and hope in our world. So Dr. Zagano and I are going to have a conversation about that and about the spiritual practices and experiences that have helped sustain her in this work for so long. So that's going to be next month, Wednesday, June 16th at 7:30 Eastern time. And I will drop the registration link in the chat. So if you're able to right now, you could click on that and you could sign up for next month's event. I hope everyone is able to return and be a part of that. Thank you for the gift of being able to take up this work and continue the conversation with this community. Look forward to seeing you next month. With that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Zagano.
Listen, thanks, Luke, and thanks, Colleen, for your tireless support over the years. Colleen not only has been hosting these webinars, but she's also been doing a lot of research with me, particularly on the question of women religious and becoming women deacons. And I wish her the best really at Boston College up there at STM. Luke Hansen, I've known for 6 years, and I know that he knows the topic. I know he's passionate about it, and I know that he and Casey Stanton and Ellie Hidalgo and the rest of their team are very well primed to keep it going. I think the energy that Luke and Casey and Ellie bring to the event, and the fact that Colleen is on her way to graduate school gives us all great hope for the church of the future. So I hope you'll tune in next week. You don't need to, I mean, you don't have to tune in to listen about me, but tune in to Luke's conversations, different perspectives on the education to the history of women in the diaconate and how women deacons can fulfill the needs of our church, which is what it's all about. So thanks to Luke, thanks to Colleen. Colleen's the host, so she'll turn us all off. God bless you all, and blessings on Pentecost.
God bless you all. Have a good night.
God bless. Have a good night, everyone.